This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. My guest in this edition of the program is Haseen Sheikh. She's the Chief Public Defender. And Ms. Ayana Norville, she's a public defender. In that department, in the government of Trinidad and Tobago, in the justice system, let's just say. The issue, you remember this story a couple of days ago about a young man who got off on the murder charge because he pleaded guilty in the courts and because he was 16 years old when he committed the offense. And part of his defense was, well, his defense was mounted by this team at the Public Defender's Office. We want to talk about that in this edition of the program. Ms. Sheikh, good to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Ms. Norville, same thing.
Thank you for having us.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, for people who don't quite understand, the role and function of the Public Defender's Office.
Of course. So the Public Defender's Office is essentially, the easiest way to describe it is that we're the flip side of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. They are responsible for state prosecutions. We are responsible for state defense. We operate under the Legal Aid and Advisory Authority, so we deal with persons who cannot afford to have an attorney of their own. So we're essentially ensuring that they have efficient and effective representation.
Yeah. And how, let's talk about how then the determinations are made as to who gets sort of qualified to get assistance from the Office of the Public Defender.
How it usually works is that you have to qualify for legal aid. Under the Legal Aid and Advice Act, it is very specific. What you have to do is you essentially have to fill out an application form, which is a sworn form before commission of affidavits. And that basically asks you your means. For the criminal matters, it is a little looser than I would say the civil matters. For the civil matters, there's an investigator. It has to be approved by the board. The process is a little bit different. For criminal matters, it's a judicial approval. So once we fill out the form, we send it to the relevant courts, and the court decides if they deem the person fit for legal aid. Usually, if someone says they can't afford, they would give them the benefit of the doubt, because obviously a criminal matter is no small thing to deal with. So they want to ensure, if you cannot afford an attorney of your own, that one is provided for you.
Yeah. All right, let me bring you into the discussion, Ms. Norville. What makes someone want to, aspire to go and work in the Office of the Public Defender, instead of, say, you go with a Sturge or Israel Khan or Anand Ramlogan? These fellows have large names and so on. Their firms are what everybody want to go for.
Yes. I think for me, I could speak for myself. I wanted to work at the department because there were so many training and mentorship opportunities. So, for example, we engage in training on a monthly basis. In the past, we used to do training on a weekly basis. So, as I had just completed my legal education certificate, and I had just...
As the LEC?
Yes, my LEC. I had just been called to the bar. I think that the Public Defender's Department was the best place for a young budding attorney to develop skills, especially written and oral advocacy skills.
Yeah. To what extent do you think you might spend a good part of your career there, or there's a point that will come when, in fact, you will, as you will say, put up a shingle of your own?
I hope to be there for a few contracts to come.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
All right. Let's get to the matter at hand, Ms. Sheikh. So this story, well, it grabbed a lot of people, including people like myself, and I want to inquire as to what may have transpired. So just give us a little bit of the process by which, so this gentleman came in the orbit of the Public Defender's Office. In this story I read, it said that you were, his defender, yes, in that sense, and so you advised him how to plead. And
correct. So he came to us through the fast track system, yes, first. So there's a system before the court where if you are awaiting an indictment, you have gone through the magisterial process, you've been committed to stand trial. He was one of those persons who was awaiting an indictment. So we assist in that process. So he was one of those who was on that list. And based on conversations with him and so forth, we recognized that he wanted to pursue a particular course. He is unique in the sense that he was a minor at the time of the offense. So what would be normally applicable for a charge for murder is not applicable to him. And I think...
That's to begin with, as you would say, that's going in.
That's going in, correct. So meaning that the death penalty for murder is what exists.
That was never a possibility.
It's never a possibility for a minor. For the minors, death penalty is not an option. The question is what sentence is available. And so our judge in this particular case indicated, based on looking at the bits of legislation, that the best thing was a determinate sentence, and the court would assess what that sentence is. So the court went through that process. So we had instructions for him to plead guilty. He went through a maximum sentence indication, which is he went to the court, indicated that he wanted to plead guilty. The court said, this is what I am willing to give you based on the facts of the offense, and he accepted that, and then we went to the guilty aspect of it when he was actually sentenced, which is what happened last week.
Yeah. So to what extent he had to be, let me ask you this, Ms. Novel, to the extent that you know, he had to be sort of convinced to accept the plea rather than try and deny it. Because for some of us, you know, the fear behind admitting to committing a felony, committed a homicide, that could play heavily in some people's minds.
Yes, I think from the start, from our first interaction with Mr. Lizama, he had indicated his intention to plead guilty. So he had always possessed this unequivocal desire to admit to the offense that had been committed.
Yeah. And then between the time of that commission of that offense and the decision of the court last week, some years had elapsed. He was on remand all that time.
He was on remand all of that time, but he was on remand at YTRC, so he was not in maximum sentence in the MSP.
What is the R in that stand? But it used to be YTC, right?
It used to be YTC.
The R stands
for it's Youth Training and Rehabilitation Center,
okay.
which is very important in the case of Mr. Lizama, because I think he actually embodies what they envision that that facility to be, because I think that was the biggest part of what led to the fact that he was able to go home. And you know, I'm always very mindful of how we phrase someone going home. It is not that he did not serve time. He served 10 years and 9 months. He served time. Yeah. And that was 10 years and 9 months of being deprived of his liberty for what he pleaded guilty to.
And he was in remand.
And he was in remand. So remand is a very, you know, remand usually means that you're not convicted, you're housed in a prison and so forth. And I mean, for the vast majority of that time, bail was not available for murder. That's a very recent development. So
but why I ask the question is that if, in reality, there's not so much of a difference between having been committed or being on remand, because you're in a prison and
yes and no. So different prisons have different things available to them. So YTRC is heavily focused on rehabilitation because they are dealing with the youth. And they also have a lot more programs geared towards that. MSP, Golden Grove, and Port of Spain, they're all very different facilities, and they also house a far greater number of prisoners than YTRC does. So what is available to the population at large there is a little bit different. Remand generally for the adult population means that you're not exposed to quite a number of programs, because a lot of those programs are carded for the convicted persons. And I mean, it's unfortunate because 2/3 of the prison population right now is in remand.
Right. And so how long he spent?
He spent in YTRC, he spent 10 years and 9 months.
And in that time, he didn't sort of graduate to being considered to be in
so he was also a very, I mean, in terms of being an adult
prison, yes.
So he is also, housing of a prisoner is a prison decision. They decide where they house persons. He would have entered the system as a youth. He would have entered at the age of 16. And they, based on his progress and the plan that would have been executed for him and the rehabilitation and the programs, and Ms. Norville could speak to the number of programs that he would have engaged in, they decided he was a good role model for the other youths in that prison, and they wanted to keep him. It's a very rare thing when you see an actual superintendent of prison indicating, we want to keep this prisoner here. We understand that he's aged out, but it is better to keep him here. He is doing good work. He is, you know, essentially the epitome of the rehabilitation, and that's what they wanted, and that's why they kept him.
Right. So you want to talk a little bit about that, expand on that a little bit, Ms. Novel?
Yeah, so particularly with Mr. Lizama, he had engaged in numerous programs he was the 10-time Calypso champion at the YTRC. He was a drummer in that he used to perform at Best Village competitions. He was a boxer of the National Trinidad and Tobago Boxing Association. He had done several courses, trade courses, in plumbing, woodwork, all of those trade skills. He had done subjects at the CSEC level as well.
Yeah.
So mathematics, English, social studies, etc. He would have been invited to several places to perform. He went to Nallis Library, he performed for the judiciary, he had performed in several places. So he was actually interacting with the public on several occasions. So numerous,
Right.
too many to list.
Right. Can you talk a little bit then about how he and perhaps you all in the system dealt with the fact that given the insights the general public has now about his personality, and you're talking about his, in my phraseology, his leadership, his sort of innate leadership skills that he had and nature that he had, how he ended up in a situation where he was confronted with this alternative. Some guy tell him, well, give him a gun and tell him, well, shoot that fella.
I think we have to be mindful of the circumstances that people find themselves in. So he was a young man at the time, and his circumstances are very particular. This was all in the context of gangs and how gangs operate, and you basically do what you're told. And if you don't do what you're told, there are repercussions for that. He also had the very unfortunate experience of seeing his father killed in front of him, also through gang warfare. So all of these things would be unique factors that would have shaped him and would have shaped his responses, and why when somebody gave him a gun, why he would have responded in a particular way. I suspect one of the most noteworthy things, and I'm not sure if this was accurately indicated and came out, is that they didn't know who did this killing. He surrendered. He went to the police. He offered voluntarily himself and indicated everything that happened. So I think that's very important, because this was essentially...
All of that then tended to work in his favor.
Well, yeah, I mean, work in his favor in the sense that it was circumstances that the court could take into account, because as the court rightfully said, they do not sentence the offense. As public, we say, oh, murder, you get to go home for murder, but it's not that. They are sentencing the offender. They are sentencing Romel Lizama. What did he do? What was his circumstances? What brought him to this position? And more importantly, how is he going to survive in society now, and can he? And that's where the rehabilitation really came in.
Yeah, you make a very vital point there about some of us, ordinarily who don't work in the business. As you say, a lot of people would take it from the point of view, well, look what he did, and put him in the rest of the how many other murders we have in the country. Yeah.
Correct. We're in no shortage of murders, unfortunately.
Yeah. So, did he? To what extent he demonstrated remorse and so on during this period?
I think in terms of remorse, I mean, the act of even going to the police, he absolutely took responsibility. I don't think that there is any remorse that any person could really demonstrate for taking of a life. So I think that concept of saying something, doing something that is going to really fully, you can't recover that life. But what you can do is commit to a life going forward that you're not going to do that. And I think that's something he really did. And he has taken that opportunity to make those changes. And I feel that's a very important step.
Yeah. Ms. Dover, so you're an attorney, probably not necessarily somebody who's an expert in language and languaging and so on. But I was privy to a conversation on the weekend about this incident. And one of the people who were speaking is somebody who is very versed in, she's an author, she's into literature, she's a PhD and so on. And she interpreted what she read to mean that Mr. Lizama said that he was forced into the action. The reporting said that he was told, which is a difference from being forced. So it is a kind of a view that somebody is disputing. You say the boy forced him, the man forced him to do it, but that's not in the reporting. And that's a whole other issue, okay, how people read things and interpret it in their way.
Yes, interpretation, it's always something.
Yeah. I think that based on the facts that came out in this case, that from his viewpoint, he was forced. I understand that interpretation can be different for everyone, but in terms of how he felt at that point in time,
he didn't have a choice.
yes.
Is it something we discussed?
And that's the circumstances, which is
Kill or be killed.
Kill or be killed.
Yeah.
And that is the sad reality of a number of our young men out there who engage in gang warfare. It's not necessarily that you want to do it. I mean, I'm not making any excuses for them by any stretch of the imagination. But the reality is, if you're in a system like that, where it is you're seeing people falling down around you, literally, then you have to make choices for your survival. And that was something that I think Mr. Lezama had to do. And that also having witnessed a murder of his father, nonetheless, I mean, that obviously would have had an impact on him.
Yeah, and then from what you outlined about, I mean, the position he took from the beginning is that he wasn't going to shy away or run away or try to shade in any way the fact that he did this. And so those things tended to have worked in his favor, but yes. it took 10 years.
It took 10 years. Meaning that, I mean, it was not his fault that it took 10 years. Our justice system is notoriously slow.
Yeah, that's the system.
You know? And then when you go to magistrate's court, they don't call upon you to plead at that point in time. So you don't have that opportunity there at magistrate's court to plead and say, well, I'm guilty of the charges, please sentence me. At the magistrate's court, they simply determine if there's a case to be had, and they send you to the high court. And then that interim period, you know, abyss of sorts, where you are simply waiting to find out when that indictment is going to be filed, because until that indictment is filed, you don't have a document that puts you before the high court. So that time frame in waiting, unfortunately, this is something that could have happened a long time ago if our process was a little faster.
Yeah. And to what extent, given the experience you would have with working the system from that end of it, that a lot can be better done with a different kind of approach. But then you're talking about the public defender's office, which is representing people who can't afford otherwise, and that kind.
Yeah. I mean, there are a number of things that could be different. I think in the case of Mr. Lezama, being at YTRC afforded him opportunities. Opportunities that a number of persons who are on remand at MSP, Port of Spain, Golden Grove, they may not have. Or they may not even recognize that they can engage in it, because knowledge is power. And I'm not certain that they all have those opportunities, because, as I said, a number of it is restricted to the convicted persons. And then ultimately the prison, just like everywhere else, they are limited on resources, so there's only so many things that they can do. But I think the opportunities that were available to him, you know, silver lining, is that he was able to do so much more. Had he stayed outside, his circumstances may have been very different. So, you know, I believe in things happen for a reason. So perhaps that this worked out for him and to his benefit.
Yeah, and we're having this discussion on the day that it is his birthday.
It is his birthday today.
Which for otherwise he might have been here.
Correct. Yes. I mean, and that's the thing. Could you imagine spending 10 years behind bars, not being able to embrace your family, not being able to just have that luxury of cutting your cake and having the things that we take for granted? So today is his day, and I think he's entitled after his long 10 years to have that.
Yeah, and in some of the reporting, again, it was said that in one or two or a couple of opportunities for him to perform as a calypso, and he was he was let out for that, and he won prizes in competitions, in calypso competitions.
Yes, I mean, and even the last calypso that he did,
he
it
made
was
it
about
to the
rehabilitation.
Yeah, Walls of Renovation was his performance, and
Walls of Renovation.
Walls of Renovation. It's on YouTube as well, but he would have made it to the semi-finals of the Calypso
Fiesta.
Yeah, in the Skinner Park.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. And I mean, I think in terms of, he is testament to what you can do. The prison system, yes, nothing is without its faults. But if you are in the system and you have the benefits of being able to engage and be able to be a productive member of society, that's what we want. Yeah. Because we want persons to take responsibility. And as you said, you want them to be remorseful. You want all of these things. But remorse without progress, How is that going to work? You could be very sorry, but if you sit down and do nothing, when you come back, what's going to be waiting for you? Yeah. So he is a very good example of using your time wisely, about embracing opportunity. And more importantly, that we as society, we need to be more cognizant of the fact that these persons are being punished for their mistakes. We do not need to punish them twice when they come out. Let us give them a chance to become law-abiding members of society again.
To what extent, let's take up that point, Ms. Novel. To what extent you find yourself in discussions with people who absolutely misunderstand the role and function, the services you all provide?
Almost every day.
Every day.
Almost every day you would hear comments like, why are you defending criminals? You know, why are you a defense attorney? These people guilty. They don't, you know, send them to hang. So you would often experience conversations like that. And I mean, if anyone looks at comments on social media, you would see there are several comments. Even under Mr. Lazama's article on social media, you would see several comments about why he was released and etc. So I do understand, I mean, I am a member of the public at the end of the day, so I do understand the need for punishment, and I do understand their concerns, but I think that that must also be balanced, as Ms. Sheikh said, against the person who is before the court, whether he has rehabilitated, whether he has prospects of reintegrating into society, etc., whether he's remorseful, and those things must also be taken into consideration as well. Just a point to note, at our department, we do have several clients who plead guilty. The majority of our clients actually plead guilty and they accept their punishments. And then we have those who wish to go to trial and to fight their matter because they are of the view that they are not guilty. So, yeah.
And that's ultimately what we want. We want persons to accept responsibility if they are guilty, and for persons who are not guilty, we can't make the assumption that because someone is charged that they're guilty. The state has to prove their case. And that's the whole point of a democracy. We want to ensure that persons' rights are upheld, and that's where we come in as a department. Our job is to ensure that those persons who are placed before the court, that they have a fair trial, that due process was followed. Our job is not to let them go. It really isn't.
You know, the phrase "catch me if you can," I'm thinking about people who might be guilty of having committed an offense, or at least vulnerable, but their disposition is, well, you know, you find me guilty, I'm not going to admit to anything.
That's also an available option, but that's the beauty of a democracy. That's the beauty of your constitutional right, that you have a right to be presumed innocent until proven otherwise. That's what that says. So if you are making an allegation against me, then you should be called upon to prove it, and proof based on the evidence that you bring before us, you know. And so I know, yes, there is that concept that maybe that there are persons who are forcing them, but they're entitled to do that. And, you know, I always say to people, it's easy to judge until it's your family member, yeah, until it's your relative, until it's somebody you care about. You would want that for them. You would want to ensure that they have good representation. You would want to ensure that the processes were followed properly, that they didn't give a confession statement because they were beaten. You would want that. So being guilty and having, yes, the person could have committed a crime, but it's not necessarily always the crime that they said. So there are so much nuances. And I just think that we need to be very careful about that concept of, because someone is charged, they should just, you know, accept responsibility, and that we should throw them in jail and throw away the key. I don't think that's what we want.
And to what extent, you know, people, some of us really buy into, understand and appreciate the presumption of innocence. So I can have from both of you. So you go first.
I think it's definitely something that is misunderstood. And I go back again to social media. As soon as someone sees that someone is charged, they say, yeah, that one guilty. You know, they automatically assume guilt upon being charged. But as Ms. Sheikh said, there are so many circumstances that exist, and there may be so many factors which led to that person being charged. It's not always a case that everyone who is charged is automatically guilty. So I think that that concept is something that the public really needs to understand, that until a person is found guilty, whether they plead guilty or they go to trial and they are found guilty and are convicted, then they are presumed innocent until that time.
Expand on that.
I mean, the thing is, we see the mugshot, so to speak. You know, they take the pictures, and unfortunately, those pictures don't look so good most times.
They never did.
You know, so we look at the pictures, we say, hey, that man look like he steal that. You know, but that's not for us. It's not, it is genuinely not for us. We have to go through the process. If they have to lay their charges, they do their part, and then the evidence comes and we go through that process. But ultimately, once process is followed, and once everybody does their part, because everyone has a part to play, and I think it's often, they always seem to think that when a man gets a not guilty verdict, oh gosh, that defense counsel chain up the jurors and, you know, and all of that. Defense counsel can't make anybody do anything, you know. What the jurors or what the judge, because we have judge-alone trials too, and they also bring back not guilty verdicts. It's not specific to jurors alone. The reality is it's based on the evidence. It's based on the facts. So if the police do their investigation and they uncover all of the relevant facts and it's presented before the court, there's very little we can do. Very little.
But, you know, for the sort of the unrehearsed, I would say, uninitiated kind of mind, it comes across sometimes that there are some attorneys who seem to have a knack for getting their clients off. And so.
I would say not at the department, not at the police.
We don't believe in getting our clients off. I can say, I mean, I was in private practice prior to being at this department. And yes, I had not guilty verdicts, you know, but does that mean I got somebody off? Or does that mean that the state did not prove its case? And I think that's the important part. And I know a lot of the public is like, okay, she's talking legal talk, you know, trying to, you know, give us that kind of jargon to confuse us.
Legalese.
But it's not that. It's not that. It's pure and simple. It's like when you are in primary school. Let me give you a simple example. You're in primary school and John says, Jane hit me. You weren't there. You don't know. Those are two children fighting. You have no idea what happened. If they had a camera, great. If there was CCTV footage, great. If there was a teacher overseeing, lovely. But apart from that, it is two versions.
And in a lot of cases,
you know?
Jane would have a rep in the school already.
Correct. Maybe
or
Jane,
John.
maybe, you know, maybe Jane liked to hit. It's possible. You know, I remember, you know, in preschool, you know, and have those kids who like to bite.
Yes.
And you know who they are. It's not, but the point is that we cannot make assumptions. And I think our problem as a society is that we're quick to do that. We're quick to assume the worst. We're quick to say, hey, this is what happened. We were not there. I certainly was not there. So no matter what, and we are a creature of our clients' instructions.
And some of us are very expert at putting two and two together.
Two and two is always 4 for him. It doesn't matter. I mean, regardless, it's not even on us to have an opinion about what the client did or didn't do. That's not our job. Our job, fair trial, was due process followed. If they're pleading guilty, to ensure that the sentence is fair and what the law prescribes. Very specific.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Ms. Haseen Sheikh, Chief Public Defender, and one of our able assistants, Public Defender Ayana Novel, the case of a gentleman who was found, well, the plea of not guilty held in his favor, having killed someone whom he said it was because of an order from someone else. That's our broadcast for this edition of the program. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
WESN The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former Mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you do in our country.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is there no pressure on Nicholas Ball?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
People really want to know, what about me? Where do I fit? Yes. What is in the ride for me in terms of a better Trinidad and Tobago? And I'm pleased to shed some light on that.
The purpose of bail is to ensure your attendance at court. That's it. It is not punitive. It is not rehabilitative.
We, the police officers, we are professional, and we are here for whenever the survivor is ready to come forward.
We have the right to private and family life, the right to religious freedoms and beliefs and thoughts and expression. But these rights are not absolute. Certain rights can be limited.
The law is to govern the whole. It's for all of us in public.
What's the best way to grab the attention of viewers?
Please exercise more patience. You have to be kidding me.
Doing what we do best. I'll say at the very least it's a conspiracy of laziness against the people.
Join me, Keaton Shaw.
And me, Sean Michael Small, for Talking Point.
Weekdays from 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
We go in depth on the trending issues and engage the most controversial newsmakers
as we get them to account to the people for their actions.
You can't go to the government with nothing. You can't go to cabinet with an empty hand, with a wish.
I'm glad that we're having this a sober, mature discussion.
In the present situation, I expect a continuation of the chaos.
Join us for the discussion, Mondays to Fridays.
Only on WESN,
the content capital.
Join me, Sule A. Joseph, as I delve into the day-to-day psychological issues plaguing our society. We will discuss behaviors that encompass the biological influences, social pressures, and environmental factors that affect how you think, act, and feel. Sight. Thursdays at 11:30 a.m. only on WESN, Content Capital.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
We are WESN, the premier platform for Caribbean content. WESN, covering West, East, South, and North. WESN, we entertainment, sports, and news. WESN, available on Greendot 7, Amplia 118, Airlink 7.